Hey everyone, I wanted to jump on real quick and talk about Black Moon Lilith in the horoscope. I was asked this question just the other day and I thought that it seemed like good timing to talk about it, given that we've just spoken about the North and South nodes and the relationship with the moon. And of course, like the nodes, Black Moon Lilith is not a celestial body but a mathematical point, and it is relative to the moon. Black Moon Lilith is considered the shadow of the moon. It is a consequence really of the rejected feminine problem. So when we come to understand the lunar problem, certainly esoterically at large in terms of psychic development, psychic wholeness, as we discussed too with the nodes, understanding where we might have push and pulls, very fourth ray energy there, and the moon corresponds to the fourth ray, and where there is a certain need for psychic occupation, transfiguration, integration, the Black Moon Lilith point is a really great place to look at in the chart and consider. There's been some great Lilith work done out there. One of the prominent ones that comes to mind is by an astrologer named Tom Jacobs. And I'm sure if you've done some Lilith work before, you know a bit about Lilith, you've probably come across his name before. He wrote a book called Lilith Healing the Wild, and he also has a series of videos on YouTube that you can view, and I'll link them down below because they're a good starting point to go and check out, and we'll get into why Lilith in the chart is important just shortly. But what I wanted to really get to was to first start out from an esoteric context. So yes, there's a connection to the moon, and as we know, the moon is the prison of the soul, all of that which is unregenerated, automated patterns and all of this. And so we talked about the nodes before. And so Black Moon Lilith is going to bring yet another key to that equation. And from the psychological angle, Lilith is that part of the rejected feminine, or an angle of it, let's say, that is a natural consequence of the deep divorcing that's happened from instinctuality across aeons of time. And so what we see with Lilith in the chart is there is often a push and pull dynamic, just as we see with the moon, but with a part that is responding to, or is in existence as a consequence of us existing in a Saturnian realm or a post-rational realm, and having to deal with the leftover consequences of this basically a sad, depressed, unhealed, psychotic in some cases, but also powerful feminine energy. Now, Lilith in the chart for that reason can be, or is rather, an indicator of a point of power and a need to reclaim that energetic force. And it can be also an indicator of a place of manipulation. And that is just a natural feminine shadow. When we have something that is rejected, then we've got all of that, in the case of the feminine, the instinctual power, and then it becomes manipulating. So what we can often see with the Black Moon Lilith point is a push and pull within whatever sphere it is touching. Let's say it is a Lilith in the first house person. So in the first house, that's personality and body and interests of the person themselves. So having Lilith in the first house may be a strong indicator of Lilith themes touching the life. I worked with a person once, or knew a person rather, that had a Lilith in the first house, and it was conjunct a lot of other planets, and this person had actually started out their early life as their young adult life as a stripper. So what a perfect example of rejected, it's powerful feminine eros, and the stripper is someone that gets a lot of that sexual projection, right? It's the lesser aspect, or not the lesser aspect, excuse me, but it's, let's say, the Madonna whore. It's the whore element, and they're getting that sexual projection. So this person, having lived that out, now they evolved out of that, or it worked in a way to integrate that placement, and it moved into a different kind of expression. But that's a good sort of exaggerated almost and literal example of, let's say, I mean, a stripper is a dancer, right? So it's the movement of the body and bringing a natural oozing sexuality to themes of the first house in the exoteric sense. So where the Black Moon Lilith is will indicate where there is, once again, a need to integrate and regenerate that energy. There is a wound there of the rejected feminine. Now, there's many different angles of the Lilith myth. The standard one, or the most simple one, is that she was the first wife to Adam as the male principle in the Garden of Eden, and it was actually Eve who came later. Now, this is where we get a little deeper with our esoteric understanding. So, or we'll start with the typical understanding of the myth first. So the idea was that Lilith did not want to be subjugated to Adam or the man. And so she decided to rebel against the divine plan or something like that. And she went off to rule her own space and be sovereign and individual in her own way. And then Eve came after the fact. But what are we to make of this esoterically? And we will get to the psychological dimension of that. But what are we to make of it esoterically? This is actually really interesting, because what we understand from the ageless wisdom is that right now we are cosmically, our solar system is part of the development of the second ray aspect of deity. It is said that the first major solar system in our greater like this interplay of these different cosmic relationships and with another solar system, this first solar system was actually developing the third ray aspect. And so we had strong influence through Cancer and Virgo in that solar system. And those two signs are said to be the oldest of our current 12 signs that we know today. So that is to say that the first thing that was developed first, relative to whatever mysterious cycle that we're in now, was the matter principle, was the intelligence principle. Now we have that, and now what's developing is the consciousness principle, which is a second ray aspect. So the great goal of our current epoch at a cosmic scale is the integration of consciousness and matter. And here is where we get a lot of our dualistic problems. Matter on its own is away from consciousness. And we've talked about this with Cancer and especially Virgo as the virgin, that which operates as kind of separate and sovereign and is the development of all of those third ray processes of intelligence and adaptability and all of the wisdom intelligence that comes through substance. So when we say that Lilith was away from consciousness, or she chose to be away from consciousness, we're really getting a little echo of what at its most fundamental and esoteric truth is the fact that the first principle of deity that was developed was the third ray. And even though we might say that spirit was the first principle, which may in one sense be true, in terms of our manifested reality, it is really the feminine principle that is the root of it all. Because why? Because we're in substance, we're in existence, we're in the third ray realm of time, of law, cause and effect, that's very Saturnian, of substance itself, matter, the earth, all of this, earth being a third ray planet as well. So Lilith then is an echo to this esoteric truth. So that is the esoteric root or foundation of where we have the Lilith problem at the cosmic level. Nonetheless, there is a psychological problem. And so in that way, the Black Moon Lilith placement in the natal chart is, like the nodes, as I just said, a further description and provides further information about the lunar problem, about the problem of the personality, and where there needs to be a reclamation of psychic energy. So wherever the Black Moon Lilith is in the chart is going to show some point of either a disconnect from that instinct in that realm, the sign and the house that it's in, or an excessive expression of that as a part of that, well, fuck you. And here we can have the either identification with the harsh masculine principle of consciousness, which is rejecting of the feminine and part of, let's say, the patriarchal problem, which is really a negative masculine or a negative father problem, a retraction away from and then a shutting down of what is fundamentally a deep instinctual power. So we either have that angle, or someone identifying with the Lilith problem, identifying with the rejected part, and then there's a push and pull. So in the early phases of working with the Lilith placement, it is going to indicate, just as the moon does, and in some sense just as the nodes do, the need to understand and discern where we are on that scale of push and pull, and then to integrate, consummate, and bring back into wholeness what that energy is evoking when we look at where, in this case, the Lilith is in the natal chart, in the horoscope. So as I said, just as the nodes do, it's going to indicate a problem with the personality. It won't necessarily say anything about the soul life. However, I would always consider it in terms of what the soul is trying to do if we've got a prominent placement of that black moon Lilith, whether it's in the first house, an angular house, in some kind of trine, sextile to the ascendant or to a sacred planet even. And we could always play with that in terms of how that problem and that process of healing and integration is going to inform something about the life of the unfolding soul. However, when we do integrate the Lilith energy, we should find that it becomes kind of just as the moon is, and just as the moon does in the natal chart, be kind of a dead zone and just be an echo of a certain kind of resource that we can come in with, but it's not going to be necessarily a really prominent energetic force. Once we integrate the moon, the nodes, once we integrate the untouched elements of substance, they're just going to, it's a restoration of psychic energy, and it brings about a personal wholeness in terms of the psyche itself, and it allows for a more balanced, a more integrated, and a more full personality. And just as we spoke about with the nodes, that is fundamentally important to be able to then stabilize the solar life in terms of just the basic common sense piece of needing a stable personality, of needing an earthy and grounded and balanced personality to be able to then, with consistency and with reliability, do what is the soul work. And then we start talking about the intuitive faculty and some of the more metaphysical stuff as it has to do with the solar initiations and all of this. One thing I did want to point out with the Lilith problem is that we need to be very, very careful about identification with the rejected feminine. I see this a lot in New Age and spiritual spaces with the women. Not that it couldn't be a man, I'm sure they exist out there too. But because it is a feminine principle, just generally we see more of a skewing of women with the feminine problem. Just as we may say that let's say the masculine problem, insofar as it expresses in spirituality, might be that which is too concerned with transcendence or too concerned with the principle of consciousness and, you know, being detached and all of this. And then the Lilith counterpart to that would be like, but what about experience? And what about feeling? And like being a part of all of it, you know, all of this. To become identified with an archetypal energy such as Lilith is a dangerous path to tread. Any kind of identification with any archetypal energy is bad, full stop. It creates a kind of psychotic instability. And the fundamental reality is that the only thing that heals or brings these lost parts into being is consciousness. And you cannot be conscious of what is going on while you are identified with an archetype. Because what's happening in that situation is that the ego, now using it in a psychological sense, that is your conscious awareness, is not holding the sphere of love, truth, the will to good, all of these different things. It is instead getting swallowed up by an archetypal energy. And there we get the kinds of, it's the same reason that Venus is in detriment in Scorpio. It's like the principle of perception, logic, and reason falls into the psychic astral substance. So it's really tempting for a lot of women to, they start working with these feminine processes. Let's say the menstrual cycle comes online in a new way, or they go through some kind of exploitative experience. They have the heavy animus problem that comes up with a man, or the abuse, the Libra problem of that kind of exploitation, or whatever, a plutonic issue in that way. And there can be this wanting to become the feminine power, but there's a certain megalomania in it. And what's ironic about that is if that's happening, your own consciousness in a way is kind of exploiting that feminine realm of being, which is the psychic substance, which is the astral plane, which is the archetypal realm, because you're making yourself into something out of that energy. And what's lacking in that dynamic is actual love and actual relationship. And of course, that's what the real wound is longing for. Because at the core of that rejection is a longing to be loved, a longing to be touched, to be seen, to be healed. And when women become identified with this problem, what they tend to find is that they will attract men who reflect that exploitation problem, whether it's an abusive man, narcissistic, sexually abusive, violent, whatever. That would be the negative animus problem personified. Or on the other side of that, an impotent man who bends to the egocentrism of the woman due to his own mother complex or problem. And I see that a lot. And once again, what's happening in that is an absence of true relationship. I've seen women who strike me as being quite almost borderline, as in the personality disorder, be elevated into thrones of so-called feminine oracle transmission. It happens a lot. And it's way problematic because to me, when I look at that, like the women, oh, this is so amazing. You know, I'm like reclaiming my feminine power. And I'm going, but all of this is a consequence of not having connection to the feminine power. You're just building an identity out of it. And then, of course, that immaturity of consciousness is reflected in the kinds of men that come in. So one of the big pieces of this here is that there needs to be an integration with the masculine principle of consciousness as, let's say, pure love. And this is starting to echo the Pisces-Virgo axis. And if Virgo is the feminine, it's a strong Deva sign. It's one of the oldest signs in the zodiac. And it's esoterically ruled by the moon. And we have all of the different fragments of the moon. Of course, the Virgin Mary and the Mary Magdalene, who were considered separate entities, are really at a deeper esoteric level one in the same. It's Magdalene represents the dark feminine eros, and it's understandable why, in terms of our current collective fragmentation, the Magdalene was reduced to the whore. The eros was like, that's what it is about, and it needs to be redeemed. But the fact that she was a prostitute or something, it's like it's that projection from that part of the masculine psyche which has rejected the reality of the deep and the dark feminine, which is a deeply encompassing, nourishing, healing power, and it melts. Think about Mary Magdalene, with the feet of Jesus. I mean, it's the healing and the melting away. It melts away consciousness and brings it into a kind of wholeness, and that's like getting sucked into a black hole. And if you're identified with a point of consciousness, it's the rigid masculine problem, then that's the thing that doesn't want to pop and then go down and transform. And we kind of touched on this in my video about menstruation as well, and talking about the moon and the dark feminine process in that way. But that masculine problem, in terms of that principle of consciousness and the principle of love, has to be touched, because it is that which develops the spiritual phallus, which is able to penetrate deep, dark down into the depths. That's why the Virgo is the virgin, but the idea of purity is that I only allow past the veil that which is of the most pure consciousness. And so many of the women that I see who are identified with the Lilith archetype, whether they say they are or not, it's not about whether they present as such, but in terms of the psychological space that they're in, they're unable to penetrate themselves with consciousness, which is why they are still identified with the rejection, because the true solution would be I can go so deep down into myself that I turn over that which has been lost or turned insane or reduced to this sad, depressed state of the feminine, and bring it into its truly powerful and fully expressive state. But because a lot of women are not working with the masculine problem and becoming conscious of what that is inside of themselves and the fact that it's there, which is why they're identified with the frickin' rejection, they are unable to penetrate themselves deeply. And again, the men that they end up being surrounded by reflect that incapacity to penetrate, whether it's the harsh, evil penetration or the impotent mummy's boy. But they're two sides of a lack of what is the true masculine. The consciousness which loves so completely is willing to sacrifice itself for the creation so completely. Now we're getting into Jesus and the Christ and the crucifixion and the monad that is so willing to love completely that it will do whatever it takes to go down and 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 deeper, 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 deeper. All of this. Part of that masculine problem too is not just a love problem, but also that of silence. And this is where we get to a very Eastern understanding of the emptying out of the headspace. This is the Shiva. Because the Shakti principle is all of that which rises as that movement within existence. And we need to be able to hold enough space and silence for that not to then either be suppressed or then twist into what becomes the psychotic feminine, which is, now I'm projecting all this meaning or making meaning out of nothing, and now I'm reactionary, and oh, how dare you say that to me? Oh, that's all of this Shakti force spinning. Silence, 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 emptiness, 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 emptiness. And we see that echoed just in the male psychology with the tendency for men to either check out or get space, emptiness, in ways that are maladaptive, which would be like drinking all the beer or removing himself from life. But the true urge of that energy is to become so strong in the ability to hold the emptiness. We think here about outer space and the space between the celestial bodies. That's something to meditate on. Emptiness, emptiness, emptiness. Oh, you have to be able to develop emptiness. I know a lot of women in the spiritual space, they go, yeah, but that's too yang, so I don't want to do that. You need to be inclusive of that too, though. Yes, include the movement and the eros and all of this. But if you're unable to hold emptiness, then that's equal to you being unable to penetrate those parts of yourself that rise from an untrue place, because the shadow of the feminine is its capacity to wield substance so powerfully that in the absence of consciousness, it becomes manipulative and deceptive. So we've gone off into a few different directions here now, as per usual. But just talking about the feminine rejected problem and in the female psyche and the need for the consciousness to come, the reality is you can identify with Lilith all you like, but we are not animals. We have the problem of consciousness, whether you want it to be the case or not. I once saw a woman who was totally identified with this archetype, write this whole thing about how consciousness, as a principle generally, is fundamentally exploitative and evil. And she wrote this whole thing about it. And I'm thinking, you know, you had to use your consciousness to even fucking write that. You can't express without consciousness. So, and of course, what was this woman's history like? This is someone who's really kind of elevated up there in this spiritual space as a feminine oracle. What are their relationships with the men? Exactly what I just described before. Abusive psychopaths or the impotent mother-wounded boys. Well, there you go. Because that's your attitude about consciousness. For you, I mean, that's the truly like matriarchal inversion. Yeah, the only thing that's good is feminine. I mean, and what's in that? A lack of love. Just in the same way with the patriarch problem. Fuck you, all the feminine eros and the power that intimidates me. Lack of love. A lack of love. So, you know, there's a lot of that out there, and we got to be really careful about that. The responsibility for consciousness and the development of the principle of consciousness as generally a masculine principle to be able to hold, contain, and be present with the feminine, because so much of that which moves is that, all of this, this is the disruption that's moving out of when we sink deeper, 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 deeper down. This is the virgin forest now with Virgo going down into the quiet unconscious. Down. You need strong consciousness to do that. You go down past all of those waves of chaotic movement, the tornadoes, and what's there? There's the core pain. You got to be able to sink deep enough to get there. Identifying with Lilith as the rejected feminine and then causing all kind of chaos and drama is no real dealing with the feminine problem. You're not meeting her at all. And yes, that will get reflected through the men. So I'm saying this as someone who's dealt with a strong feminine and masculine problem in life. I've had the negative mother problem, so I had to do the whole feminine restoration excavation thing, and then, you know, had that kind of animus demon dynamic with a few different men in my life, you know, so I've lived it all. I'm not speaking, I speak harshly about it only because, or harshly, I speak with a kind of, come on, get your shit together, because I've gone through it myself. And there is a need, there's a real lack of that real feminine wisdom in a lot of the female spiritual space around this subject matter. And there's too much of this adolescent, frankly, identification with, yeah, I'm going to do my dark feminine stuff. And it just comes from this wounded place. And it is immature, and it is egocentric, and it is inflated, which is part of the immature masculine problem. Bull. And it's got this whole glamour around it of being resurrecting the feminine, and it's just not. It's still squashing her, because until we can penetrate deeply enough and be truthful enough and sacrificial enough and warrior-like enough, we cannot get to her. Obviously, if she is the true virgin of the deep forest, then you're going to need every ounce of consciousness to get down there. And part of our current cultural context just is, as our inheritance, that we've gotten so far away from that kind of instinctuality. And you can say that you're about the wild feminine all you like, but you're part of this time too. You're born within that context. Part of your rational ability to even reflect on the fact that there's a rejected feminine problem is a consequence of this post-rational society that we find ourselves in, period. So we have to deal with the problem of consciousness. It's part of the mercurial rulership of Virgo, because Mercury in Virgo, because Mercury is often considered a masculine planet, represents the self-conscious part. That's actually what Eve represents. How Eve is different from Lilith is that it is evocative of that which is self-conscious and reflective. So there's a deeper angle of it there too. But that is to say that you can carry on about the wild feminine all you like, but you're part of the post-rational problem just by virtue of being alive at this time. And that goes at a deeper level or a broader level to just the reality of the fourth ray problem of the human being and the need to integrate the psychic opposites and all of this. The anima and the animus problem, the Libran problem. Okay? But let's summarize. The Black Moon Lilith point in the chart is an important place to look at in terms of that development of psychic wholeness. Check out Tom Jacobs' material on it. It's a very good, just quick, like really delivers the point home very effectively. But it's really about where can I include that instinctuality, or where am I in a push and pull with it, either retracted or excessive, or whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. If it's in the 6th house of work and routine, then maybe there's some power plays in the work or employment situation. Maybe there's a part of your own instinctive, there's something about the dynamic there that's going on. Or someone who's got Lilith on the midheaven, that's going to be a kind of there's some sort of deep feminine eros that is potentially trying to drive itself out in the career situation. But until that's included, here's the key, until that is included consciously and really owned, it will show up in ways where you're creating the rejection wound over and over again. So let's run with the 10th house example. You'll be in a career situation where you're in the power play with the boss or the authority, and they're not seeing you for who you are, or you're lashing out at them and there's constantly a thing there, or you're in a workspace where everyone's against you or something like that. But the idea here is that the Lilith problem will be as it is until the consciousness, your own consciousness aspect, is able to include that and not move from that rejection anymore. So that's the responsibility there, and that's a very fourth ray quality. It's psychic regeneration and inclusion and the alchemizing of the opposites and all of this, which brings it into very psychological fourth ray territory and lunar territory. Okay, but that's a talk on Lilith for today. I thought it was going to be a lot shorter than it was, but we talked about a lot of different bits and pieces here. I guess the feminine problem is just, so it is very intricate and complicated, and there's so many things that we can and could talk about and perhaps should talk about as well. So I hope this was interesting for you, and maybe let me know in the comments your own experience with your Lilith placement, and yeah, any insights that have come from that. Let me know what was interesting about this video too, and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Helps out the channel. Okay guys, I will see you next time.